Yeah. All right, everybody, welcome to the HR executive after party brain trust. It's the brain trust after party panel discussion. I'm here with Sarah Steers. She's the VP of HR at Escalade Sports. And one of our topic discussions today was how do you communicate and how do you measure attrition? We know that the biggest topic of discussion with many peer-to-peer groups right now has actually been around employee attrition. And it's a big problem. We're calling it the great resignation right now. So everyone's dealing with this, from CFOs to HR to CEOs. I think everybody has these kinds of questions. And so, Sarah, I want to thank you for joining me today. I'm very appreciative of this conversation. I think it's very timely and very, very relevant. And so let's just dive in. So in your experience, Sarah, I'm sure you've seen a lot. What are some ways that you measure or communicate how impactful attrition really is on an organization?
I think you can put math. You can attempt to put math to anything. So you can give attrition a 20% cost on added to an employee's salary, or if you want to factor in the cost of a headhunter to replace a role, and then there's the cost associated with training and pulling folks out of their spaces to provide kind of guidance to an employee. There probably are perfect numbers maybe out there within the organization to give a value to each role. But for me, I think in conversations with my leadership team, it's less about the dollars and cents are always important, but for me, I think it's less about the dollars and cents piece and more about the overall impact on the organization when there's a void. We run a pretty lean organization, and so if we have a turnover in any of those roles, we feel it across the board. And so for us, it's more about John in his role as supply chain leader. It's the impact it has to kind of halt the business. So the numbers are greater than your 27% for a headhunter or for a staffing agency to come in and fill it, plus 8 hours of the director's salary and 8 hours of 3 generalist salaries. I mean, it is more for us. It's almost, it can be a business stop. So it's easier to talk in terms of how it impacts the overall business and us functioning versus putting an exact dollar amount. I feel like sometimes as an HR leader, when you come to your CFO or CEO with this costs us $2,400,000, whatever, then they kind of they start to question what you're tying into that exact number. And so for us, it's really the impact of that person more so than the dollar. There is a financial hit. There's no getting around it, but we value our core employee base, and so it's the loss and the stoppage of business it creates. And that can be monetized. I realize that, but it's the value of that person and the experience they've brought to the role that really has the biggest impact for us.
That's such a good point, and that kind of segues me into this, scenario-based question. So let's say that I'm on the executive team, we're working together, and I don't really care for attrition, but you see attrition as a problem. In your experience, what are some ways that you've helped other executives understand that, employee attrition is something that we really do need to think about and consider? If it's not necessarily about the bottom line dollar numbers, how do you help them understand that this is a problem that we really do need to spend time thinking about?
Sure. I think, this, as you mentioned, kind of kicking the conversation off, right now it's a critical time to take a pulse on your people. It is becoming easier for folks to work for anyone from anywhere. So before, the challenge was the bigger companies within your geographical region, and that's where you wanted to ensure you were the best. You offered the best salaries and the best benefits package. So long as you were the tallest of the group there within your geographical region, you felt pretty comfortable as an employer, because it takes a lot for someone to relocate themselves and an entire family. But now the landscape has changed, so that again, you can your employee in Southern Indiana can work for a company out of the UK, or can work for a Canadian-based company, or a company in California. And so the conversation has kind of taken a heightened step anyways, because of just the nature of what's happening right now. Now that companies were forced into a remote working situation, realized they could do it. They could allow employees to be productive, but employees would be productive from a full-time remote position. The companies that I compete against just grew a million times, because I'm now fighting for talent with every organization in the country and outside of the country versus in Southern Indiana. So I think the conversation has had itself, I guess, is what my point is that if they're not aware of, if my leaders aren't aware of what's going on in the country and the retention space as it stands today, then I may have some other problems. There's a complete lack of awareness. But I think so the way that the nature of things have transitioned, it's a much easier conversation to have versus maybe 3 years ago, when it was important for us to really fight for giving our employees what they need to be successful, and ensuring that they're paid competitively, and that we're offering them the best in all of our benefits offerings. It brought itself to the table, I guess. The nature of this pandemic has kind of brought that conversation to the forefront. So it's much easier conversation and has a bigger focus than it ever has.
Absolutely. And, from your purview and maybe from your discussion today, aside from benefits, what are some of those other things that you think are important to think about when it comes to retaining employees longer?
I think just, you're always going to have the competition in salaries and the competition in full benefits offerings. But I think too, now you're going to fight ensuring that you've got an effective leadership team, ensuring that they know how to lead people, not just who are in front of them or in a shared workspace, but who are across the country. And it's important to people. And I think that COVID has created a bigger emphasis on that work-life balance, because people did realize that they could be effective, be productive for their organization, and then still pick up at the end of the school day. So I think transitioning and understanding that maybe the focus, and we knew some of it was coming with the whole millennial thing, in terms of people don't want to stay in the office until 9 p.m. anymore, because they realized that when they couldn't go to the office, that they could still be productive within a normal set of working hours, or not sitting at their desk. So I don't think there no longer is there a race to be the first person in the parking lot and the last one out. Because that's not shouldn't be how productivity is measured anymore. It's measured by just straight output. So, I think that, again, a lot of this has kind of naturally transpired on its own, having gone through what we have over the last year and a half, 2 years.
Wow. We've been having this discussion a lot in this Brain Trust group. And one of the insights I think you just brought that really is fascinating to me. So I come from the startup world. And in the startup world, you raise money off of the founders and the leadership team that you're putting together. Like, investors will bet on you based off of even not so much your idea, but the leadership capabilities of the group. And I think it's really interesting what you just said, is that you can retain employees based off just leadership alone. Mission, vision, values, leadership structure, things like that are really important. And I remember having a conversation with a CEO at the beginning of the pandemic who has a global remote workforce. And he said that if you are managing people based off of time spent in a chair, you are going to suffer. Like, you are not going to be able to make it in a remote working world, because you have to measure based off of outcomes. And that is a different leadership style. And so I love what you just said, because it means that we have to kind of adapt. Perhaps maybe you could argue that's a better leadership style. And what people generally want more anyway is the ability to have flexibility, but also clarity in their roles, so that they know what they need to do. And it takes a really well-organized organization to be able to have that clarity. You can't just throw people at a problem anymore. You've got to really know what the problem is and communicate that effectively so that it can be solved.
It forces a new mindset. It forces you as a leader to say, what matters? What of all the tasks that we do on a daily basis, what matters? What impacts our business? Because we can sharpen pencils for 2.5 hours, but if we don't even use pencils because we use laptops, then who cares that we're sharpening pencils? So
Yeah.
it does, but it forces you as a leader to say, hang on, before, she was making copies of 40,000 things. Do we need those copies now? I mean, does everybody need a paper file? It as a leader, it makes you look at what you're expecting of your people and how it truly impacts the business, and changing some of the process when it doesn't have an impact. But it's critical. I believe, from my perspective, it is critical to measure employee performance based off of what we need them to do, and not based on the amount of time. There's a lot of people who spend a lot of time in chairs, not really doing a whole lot of things that are productive. So
do you feel like that's HR's primary role, is to clearly make that transition and help the leadership team make that transition in terms of defining roles?
I think that has always been part of HR's role. But I do think, I think leaders are more open to the conversation now probably than they have been in the past. HR is always focused on, take the person out when you're measuring performance, or when you're recruiting, or, take the person, that physical person out of it, and let's really focus on what we need this role to do and what it looks like to be effective. So yes, HR should always serve as kind of the guide in those types of conversations, but your leaders at the core of who they are should know that their focus is on getting the most productivity they can out of their people, and preferably in as little as time as possible.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, I want to just thank you so much for joining me on this quick Brain Trust panel after party. Appreciate your insight. Appreciate you joining us today. So thanks for joining us and joining in conversations. I hope you're able to get some good insight from the group.
It was very helpful. Yes. Very
awesome.
Time well spent.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you all at the next event.
Thank you.